full crew here. Eck has the day off. Kevin Allen will be joining us from USA Today. He just got back from Europe, so I'm going to ask him about a few questions about his trip and enough things to talk about in the NHL. But Russ, start with some pre-show. I know that you have a little baseball thing, and Peter has a little football thing. So
yeah, I noticed in the news, I guess you couldn't help but notice that the Yankees will be playing the White Sox over at the Field of Dreams in Iowa. What I like the fact that MLB is copying the NHL and branching out and going neutral sites. That's good. Mm-hmm. What I don't like is they killed the Hall of Fame game, which was an annual tradition for, I want to say, over 50 years, maybe even longer than that, of major league teams when they used to come in Hall of Fame weekend and play on Doubleday Field in front of the fans. I went to one of those games. It's spectacular. Now, that wasn't a regular season game, and this is. But the more baseball kills off traditions to just do it for money, right, is what really kind of bothers me about this. If the Hall of Fame game never been killed, I'd probably be okay with this. But I feel like MLB is doing this more for promotion than they are for anything else, because the excuse was for the Hall of Fame game, well, travel became an issue and it's out of the way. And I'm sure Iowa's really close for a lot of these teams.
Well, I don't know how the distance between Chicago and where this ballpark is located in Iowa. I would assume it's probably 3 or 4 hours drive. But I don't have a problem. I have less of a problem with this, Anthony, than I do the Yankees and the Red Sox playing games in London in a ballpark that was such a friggin' bandbox that they basically broke records for home runs. That was an atrocity.
Yeah, I much prefer a game of footy in London. I was just thinking, what was that movie years ago with Russell Crowe where they play the rain?
Alaska.
Yeah, I'm waiting for them. That's the first thing that popped in my head. So when's the Mystery Alaska game going to happen? That's the next one. And if we're going to go out of the way for a game, I like the idea. Again, at first blush, you like the idea, but at the same time, the contrivances of it are what they are. That's all, and that's kind of where I'm at with it.
I'll give you the one other thing, Mike. Yeah. And because Anthony brought up a great point. If MLB wanted to play that Alaska game, they could play it at midnight and they would get a ton of promotion out of it, because that's what happens in the Alaskan Baseball League all the time. Remember, they literally play. I want to do that one day and go, because they play from sun up to sundown, which is literally like a full day. And so they could do that.
I mean, Peter, would you have a problem with the NHL playing a game in like the middle of the plains of Saskatchewan or Manitoba or something like that? I mean,
well, they're playing a game in Saskatchewan. And Saskatchewan is nothing but plains. Like, that's all it is. I just drove through there.
He went to outside in the elements, man. That's what like.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's some neat novelty to it. I think it could be a ton of fun. I think as they learn about, as leagues learn about fans and stuff, they do things because there's enough fans who want to do it. And say what you want about the Winter Classic and who's been in it, it makes money. It works.
Yeah.
And they're going to continue doing it until they don't see it, see that happening. And I think it's good for Major League Baseball to give it a shot. I think it'd be fun. I mean, it'd be interesting. The NFL's had great success going over to London, and they're expanding. They keep seeming to add more games every year to that. They're just not going to have great success in Winnipeg when they play a preseason game. And there's my segue. There's a big pseudo controversy brewing in Winnipeg as the Packers and the Raiders are playing a preseason game here. Now, there are a lot of Packers fans here. There are a lot of Winnipeggers actually have season tickets to the Vikings and will drive down and go see the 8 games a year and stuff. Like, it's a 6.5 hour drive. It's not unfathomable. So there are only 8,700 tickets sold in a 32,000 seat stadium for this, and maybe 300 in the lower bowl, because they priced them at roughly $400 Canadian to watch a preseason game. It's insane. So it's quite nuts. I thought the initiative was kind of a bold idea when it was announced, but you got to know your market. If you just top the tickets out at $150,
right?
Do the math.
Yeah,
it's a preseason game. Find your other avenues to make money on it and around it with merchandise or something cool. Add some other things in, but you need, before you can make any money, you need people in the stands, and you're not going to do that at those price points for a preseason game. I mean, it was hard enough, Mike, as you said before the show started, for the Toronto fan or for Buffalo when they were playing games in Toronto. It's silly.
Yeah,
the NFL has a license to print money in a lot of places, but Canada is not one of them.
Right.
And if you're going to venture up here, and the promoter, it's a guy from Saskatchewan who's doing it, who's a huge event promoter, you have to know your market really well. And there's more excitement right now about a WHL team starting its inaugural season in Winnipeg that's going to play out of an absolutely heinous building until their new arena is built. And there's more excitement about that right now than the NFL.
Yeah. This is why they gave you a crappy preseason game. The NFL doesn't care about you in Canada. Like that's proof of it. They gave you a crappy preseason game. The Raiders are so desperate for money, they'll go anywhere. They'll go to the desert to play football. They don't care. Oh, they will. Actually, they are going to the desert next year. So this is just all it smacks of is an entity that's way too big for their britches in the NFL, and them just sort of giving you guys the crumbs because, hey, look, even our preseason's better than your regular season. That's what they're telling you.
Yeah, and it puts it into perspective, the story about Antonio Brown. I didn't know that the Raiders were the team that was going to Winnipeg, so now I know why Antonio Brown was doing cryotherapy, because he was afraid that it was going to be too cold in Winnipeg, and then he gave himself frostbite.
But it's not cold in Winnipeg, right, Pete?
Balmy Winnipeg.
No, but hey, Frank. I was watching Hard Knocks, and if I didn't get this wrong, he went in barefoot.
Yes.
Cryogenics, when you're supposed to wear booties. Like, if nothing else, this guy's a moron. But if the team cared anything about him, the trainer would have gone through with him what you're supposed to do when you go to this place, because now you just lost your best receiver.
You're gonna do your pinky toe.
Yeah, I mean.
See, the question, because I was doing a radio spot on Buffalo Radio this morning, and the question was, name the stupidest injury for a player in a particular sport, and this is up with Dustin Penner getting hurt with the pancakes.
No. JPP blowing off his right hand, 2 fingers on his right hand. Nothing tops that. Nothing.
I can't remember the name of the pitcher, but some pitcher cut his finger on his pitching hand, opening up a sunflower seed.
And also, there was a baseball player who had a knife fight with his wife. Maybe it was Lonnie Smith. Was that it? It was one of them who got an injury that way.
Former Philly.
World champion Philadelphia Philly. He was on that 80s squad.
Okay, let's start the show. Kevin should be joining us any minute. Hello, Hockey World. Today is Thursday, August 8th, 2019.
I'm Anthony Majoni from Sunrise Philly Magazine.
I'm Peter Tesse, back in balmy Winnipeg. There you go, Frank.
Sportsology.
And I'm Michael Agello, and this is the Hockey Buzzcast here on HockeyBuzz.com. Okay, let's start out with this. It sort of broke yesterday. I don't think it's a big story, but I think it's interesting. And I know Russ and I talked about it on the before the show, and I sort of agree with his point of view, but I want to get everybody else's thought on it. Andrei Markov, longtime excellent defenseman for the Montreal Canadiens, now is 40 years old. He 2 years ago was trying to negotiate a long-term extension with the Canadiens. They wouldn't go any more than 1 year because he's an over 35 contract. And he bolted and went to the KHL. He's played 2 years in the KHL, and now all of a sudden he wants to come back. Now, looking at the landscape of the Canadiens, where they're strong on the right side with Shea Weber and Jeff Petrie, on the left side they're not as strong. There's talk of them being interested in Jake Gardner. That would probably be fairly costly on a long-term deal. But Markov is 40, and Russ, I'll go to you first. I looked up his stats, and last year with Akbars, he had, I think, 14 points. So, I mean, I think he's done based on that. I mean, if he'd put up big points, then I'd say this is a roll of dice worth taking, but I don't know.
I'm just trying to look it up. I don't think it's Lonnie Smith with the knife fight, but it was a pretty good player like that. So I'm going to take it back for Lonnie.
Okay.
But getting to Markov, the first thing you should know about Andrei Markov is he is a world championship sweater. Like this guy at the All-Star game, you know how they have all the media interviews at the All-Star game? He was so nervous being in front of the media when it was in Montreal. He started sweating before the lights were on. Like it was just unbelievable. But anyhow, he was like,
yeah, he's like right out of the cast of Cool Hand Luke.
So is he related to Raldis Chapman?
Or David Dinkins, or there's some world-class sweaters out there. But getting to his play, nothing smacks more of I just want to play 10 games and retire so I could play 1,000 games as a HAB like Thomas Plekanec did. This is such a cheap ploy by this guy because 2 years ago he demanded a 2-year deal. They didn't give it to him, so he goes to the KHL, and now that his career is failing, oh yeah, I want to come back to the Canadiens and play 10 games so I can have 1,000 in as a Montreal Canadian, even though I stink. If I'm Bergevin, I tell him hit the bricks because you had your chance 2 years ago.
We are joined by Kevin Allen of USA Today. Kevin,
sorry, Kevin.
Hey there.
Welcome back.
Thanks.
We're going to ask you a question about your trip, but as you jumped on, Russ was talking about the story about Andrei Markov wanting to come back to the Canadiens after 2 years in the KHL, and I looked up his stats, and I think he had 33 points 2 years ago. Last year he had 14 points. I looked up Thomas Plekanec when he got traded to the Leafs and then went back to Montreal. He was 2 games short of 1,000. He signed, he played 3 games, and then he went to the Czech Republic. It almost smacks to me like Markov wants to get to the 1,000-game mark, and then he's going to go back to the KHL. What do you think?
Yeah, maybe. I've been gone, so I really don't know, too much about what's going on. And I heard what Russ said, and it seemed to me that Russ had a pretty good analysis of it. Markov isn't the player that he was years ago, and the Canadiens obviously are only going to be interested if they feel like he's going to be a pretty major contributor. So I don't know. I just don't see that it happen. And you may be absolutely right that he just wants to sort of reach the milestone.
Anthony, I mean, there are very few players that are 40 years old. I mean, you can count them on one hand that can still be contributors. I mean, it's ironic still that Patrick Marleau, after the trade to Carolina, after the buyout, everybody thought, okay, he's going to sign with San Jose, and now it's August 8th, and it still hasn't happened, and now I'm starting to question whether it will. But, I mean, I just don't see, this return to Markov just to come back and get the 10 games. It smacks to me of that.
I mean, I remember watching a little bit of Markov when he went over to Akbars Kazan. He had a good season for them. I believe they won the Gagarin Cup in his first year over there. But
yeah, I think you're right.
But then his play really kind of slipped off after that. It was a deep playoff run. And again, not a young man at this point of his career. His play definitely tailed off last few seasons. So we knew that Akbars was looking to have an influx of younger defensemen coming in. It was nice to have him back, obviously, having an NHL player come back. But now, again, it's tough. I get that he wants to come back to the Canadiens, but I don't see it happening right now. It's just unless he's willing to be like a seventh defenseman who's going to get in a game here or there and willing to, not get paid much and, possibly be plugged in as maybe a fringe defenseman, as a depth defenseman maybe. I could see it happening if he's willing to do that. If not, and obviously at a price that the Canadiens would have to be willing to go with in this case, I doubt it.
Peter, any thoughts on this? Because
you know what?
Yeah.
You know what? They probably do. They probably have some chats with him. Maybe they bring him in on a PTO, see if he's still got the legs, and then dangle a contract there. Get some butts in the stands to see, a fan favorite from years gone by come back in, play. You keep some of your younger guys or whoever you don't want to dress in the preseason, which all teams do,
sure,
and see where it goes from there. It might not be a bad move. Might not be the right move, but it might not be a bad move.
Now, Kevin, I know that you were traveling through Europe. It was I saw some of the pictures on your Facebook. Where did you go, and any interesting sites?
I mean, it was a great trip. We were in France for a couple of weeks, and it's kind of hard to even describe. But the only thing I would say about it, it was really felt like a whirlwind because we kind of went all the way from Paris down to southern France, and we never stayed in the same hotel more than 2 days. So we changed hotels 8 times, and I think when you do that, it kind of wears you out. And also, anybody who's been to Europe knows. They eat a little bit later and it takes longer. So if you go to a European restaurant, a French restaurant, and you start dinner at 7, you get out of there at 10. So, you're starting in the morning and sightseeing. But, going to Omaha Beach and Utah Beach and to see the D-Day sites, that was certainly a highlight. And then going down to Monaco, we went to the Monte Carlo Casino of James Bond fame and saw the Rolls Royce parked out front and the Bentleys and the Bugattis, sports cars. It was just kind of a fun trip. And I did make the only sports reference I can give you is that when I visited Leonardo da Vinci's last chateau where he lived until he died, it struck. I had a sports analogy to it. We all associate Leonardo da Vinci with Italy. He painted the Sistine Chapel, but as it turned out, and I certainly didn't know this, but in the latter years of his life, the King of France called and said, "Hey, Leonardo, you're late in your career. Why don't you come to France? We'll give you a chateau, and we'll give you 90 pieces of gold per month." And I thought, that would be kind of like the Red Sox taking the Yankees' best player, late in his career and stealing him as a free agent. So I think Leonardo da Vinci might have been the first free agent ever in the history, having left Italy to play for France in the final stage.
I can give you one James Bond reference. So I was on vacation in Jamaica, and they actually in Ocho Rio, and they actually have a big rock that has the James Bond logo, and I guess they use that in the water scenes for Live and Let Die, maybe.
Yeah.
And so that's the only thing I've ever visited that had the James Bond. And Mike, the earlier injury was Irving Fryer before the AFC Championship game.
Okay, the great Irving Fryer. Now Leonardo though, that was probably the first contract that somebody would want to buy out. It was a 35 and over contract that there was no buyout clause.
Yeah, I'll tell you though. I mean, what you saw there in his last chateau, he had all these crazy plans that seemed crazy at the time, but he had drawings of an airplane, a helicopter, a paddle wheel, a tank. Like he had all these drawings that he had there in his chateau. He was quite the Renaissance man. Now, one other point I was going to bring up, if I know now we think of the D-Day movie as being Saving Private Ryan, but when you're my age, it was The Longest Day.
Yeah.
And in that movie, the most memorable scene, of course, is when Red Buttons his parachutes down and his chute gets caught in San Miraglise on the steeple of the church. Well, we visited San Miraglise, and that church is still there. It's a 7th century church, and they still have, as a symbol of it, they have a dummy and a parachute hanging from the steeple. And for those who haven't been there, and the square where all the Americans came down, and of course many of them were slaughtered, that is still the same. I mean, it's still an open space, and there are still some homes there that were there when all that happened. So that was pretty memorable as well. So, but I thought coming on, and for the first time, I thought you were going to ask me about the Minnesota Wild and Don.
We're getting there. We're getting there.
Oh, we're getting there. Okay.
You wanted to use your feet into the pot, like the frog.
That has going to, I came back and I heard about this, and I think that's just one of the craziest stories I've heard in a very long time.
Well, let's start with the Minnesota part, and then we'll drift to the Carolina part, because there's a debate about which one is crazier. Because the Fenton firing, based on what we have learned via Mike Russo's pieces in The Athletic and what's come out afterward, I mean, this sounds like it was a complete disaster for 1 year where Fenton. I mean, we were looking at what Fenton did in that 1 year, trading Granlund, trying to trade Zucker, trading Charlie Coyle to Boston for Ryan Donato. Some of these deals I think looked good in terms of them being a team that was going to rebuild or retool on the fly. But maybe he wasn't on the same page with ownership, because I think that they have a core group there that they think that they can still win with, and he was going down the road of trying to rebuild. And maybe that philosophical difference on top of everything else that was going on was the problem with Fenton.
Well, here's what I would say about it. I think he actually could have survived the so-called mistakes he made in the team and changing up the team. The biggest problem that I can see, based on what I've been told, is, he just didn't develop a relationship with anybody in the organization.
Yeah.
He didn't have a relationship with the coach. Mm-hmm. He wanted to fire the coach, and the ownership had said going in that they didn't want to do that. So he simply didn't speak often enough to Bruce Boudreau. He didn't have a great relationship with the people in management. Mm-hmm. He didn't often tell ownership what he was up to. And it was just, he turned out he was a poor communicator. So I think while it's true that ownership, Craig Leopold being the owner, wasn't thrilled with what he did with the team, I think what really cost Fenton his job was the fact that he just built a very poor culture there. Like, nobody even kind of understands or knows who Paul Fenton is, from what I understand, because he just didn't make himself available and didn't sort of explain himself, and just wasn't a great communicator. So I don't know, maybe it would have worked out. We don't know for sure. I mean, we could say we didn't like all of his moves, but who knows? But we're never going to get a chance to see, because he didn't do the things that you have to do, which, and I think, saying all that, I think that's why Don Waddell looks like such an attractive candidate to Craig Leopold, because that's what he's known for. He's known as a great communicator, a guy that brings everybody in the tent. He knows everybody in the organization. He's a very upbeat guy. And, we know historically in the NHL what happens when there's a firing of a coach or GM. You go opposite. Yeah, that's always, if you had a hardliner, you want someone softer. And in this case, they had a guy who didn't communicate, well enough. And so I think that's why Don Waddell is the leading candidate, because he's exactly what Paul Fenton isn't.
Now, Anthony, I know you have to drop off in a few minutes, so I wanted to get your feel on this, because we're getting sort of confusing signals from the Carolina side of this. When Dundon comes out and says, that essentially, well, Waddell, I don't think Waddell's going to go, and he's got a job here, but and then it comes out.
Tom Geliti's article, which was shortly after our show yesterday.
Right. So, I mean, this is sort of a convoluted situation on both sides. I think Dundon is not holding Waddell to say, he's, definitely going to come back. He's not offering him a contract, and he's giving him free reign to go and talk to the Wild. And now when it comes out that Waddell might be that leading candidate, now all of a sudden Dundon says, well, I don't think he's going to go anywhere. He's going to stay. I mean, what is Dundon doing?
That's the thing. We're trying to figure out what the plan is, because if you go by, I believe it was Luke the Cox column, and what he reported, certainly, and what got reported on Twitter from his feed, was that basically that Dundon was allowing Waddell to get a quote unquote a better deal if he thinks he could get it in Minnesota. But it wasn't one of those public things where it was where he would have indicated that, and then we'll see if we'll match it. He never said that. It wasn't in the quotation. So now when it becomes the lead candidate, all of a sudden he's confident. But then there's some other, I have to go back into the article again. There's some other interesting things that Dundon says in Tom Geliti's piece, that if I like a guy, then I'm going to make sure I got to bring him back in, yada, yada, yada. And it's like, have a plan of, what is your plan of attack? And that's something that seems to be very nebulous right now, at least with Carolina. It's just the optics aren't good when you're 5 weeks out from meaningful hockey activity here. That's the biggest thing. The optics are not good.
The only thing I'd add to that is what I had said before. If Tom Dundon thought Don Waddell thought of him as a valued employee, he would have just had him under contract already. He wouldn't have allowed any of this. He wouldn't have said, go look around if you want. He would have just had him under contract. Even after all of this, he still hasn't offered him a contract.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Let me add something to that, since I know Tom Dundon pretty well, and I cover him with his football venture as well, and I got to know him a little bit. The idea of the contract is he simply does not believe that GMs should be given contracts. That's his issue. He's made that clear from the very beginning. He sees a GM employee. He doesn't give anybody he works with in his business world a contract. You're basically, it's kind of like I work at USA Today. I don't have a contract. I work on a day-to-day basis, just like a lot of us do. That's the way the world works. Well, that's not how hockey works, and that's not how pro sports works.
No.
But somehow he's got it into his head that he can change that. The problem with that is there are league rules. The league rules say, and obviously for tampering reasons, you have to identify who's going to be the representative of your team. So he'll have to sign Waddell to be a contract. But basically what he was saying yesterday is, I'm making no change. Don Waddell is my GM. I just haven't given him a contract because I don't really give my employees contracts. Now the league's going to make him do that, so I'm guessing he'll offer him a 1-year deal. And I also think he has, I'll call it a unique idea of how much executives should be paid. I think he thinks executives are being paid too much, and I think that's a reason as well. If you're going to be a GM now around the NHL, I think you expect $1 million a year. Right. And see Waddell, and this hasn't been brought up either. He's got a dual role there. He's also the team president, and here's the problem.
Yesterday,
Here's the problem. He's a very good team president. Mm-hmm. Like, he does a good job. He's done a good job there of increasing sponsorship. Even before they had success, he was getting more sponsors. He was getting more people there. He gets out in the community. He talks to people. So he's doing 2 jobs, but I don't think Tom Dundon wants to give him the money. So it's going to be interesting to see. The league obviously at some point will say, hey, if he's going to be your GM, he's got to be under contract, some kind of contract. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But I've talked to Don Waddell. He didn't really want to say too much because he's in a bad spot, and I don't blame him.
Yeah, I don't blame him either.
Yeah, he gets along reasonably well with Dundon, and Dundon is a unique and hardline guy sometimes to deal with. But Waddell gets along with everyone. So I don't know what's going to happen, but it feels like a 50-50 that
Kev, let me ask you this, Kev. Do you feel like if Minnesota made him an offer and Waddell went back to Dundon, that Dundon would match it, or do you think he'd let him go?
I don't know. That's a great question. I think he likes Don Waddell a lot. I know he does. I've talked to him about him in the past, and I think he appreciates what he brings to the table. But he's also, and he has said this before, with the exception of players, which he believes are unique, talented figures, he thinks everyone can be replaced. As he said, even me.
Right.
And he's not wrong.
Right.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. If I'm Tom Dundon or any other owner and I take that view, and all of a sudden my president and GM walks out the door and goes to another interview, and then he comes back and says, well, they made me this offer. You're paying me $500,000 a year. They want to pay me $1 million. Are you going to match? I drive him to the airport.
Yeah. Well,
here you go. Let's pack your bags and go. Because you've already made that decision of what his value is, unless there's something else going on. Right there. That's the kicker in this.
Right.
This is such an odd situation. Why would you allow him to go and talk to someone if you either believe you're going to keep him or you haven't made him an offer,
or if you value,
so at the end of the day, he can go talk to anyone because he's technically a free agent,
right?
But why would you let this go on? Because he believes he can be replaced, and he's probably not wrong. It's Don Waddell, right? Don Waddell's track record is split into 2 things, Kevin. One where you said his strengths are that he works well with people, but his other side is not necessarily sterling in terms of building winning teams and such. So you've got sort of 2 sides to Don Waddell. Mm-hmm. And if you're Dundon, you're probably looking at that. He looks at it like everything through an economics lens. So you have to sort of get in his mind of how he looks at things, and that might not be wrong, but it's very different for the NHL. And frankly, if you want to see some innovation happen in the NHL, if you want to see some things change, because it does need change, it needs to evolve, it needs to be an organic, evolving entity with some capacity. You need someone who's going to stop just recycling people because they're around.
Well,
and that's not a bad thing.
I agree with that.
Go back to baseball. Look at all the brains that came into baseball because someone tried something different, and look what it's done for the sport. It's made it a lot more interesting when it was flagging, when you didn't have guys hitting balls out of the park at 70 home runs a year and stuff. It needed something else, and it finally got it.
Right, but I agree with that to a point. But the thing is that I think Dundon's approach, which I think is flawed, is professional sports, if you're in management or if you're a player, is a meritocracy. You're paid based on how good you are. Professional athletes and even management in those professional sports are not cogs in the wheel. They can't be easily replaced. There's a quality that a manager has, that a player has, that you can't say, oh, I'll just go get this other guy and he'll fit in just as well. It doesn't work that way. It's not corporate America where you have everybody in cubicles and you can just hire somebody else and put that person in that position. So that's where I think
not with players, but it can be in other positions. Mike, I have yet to see a job description for a GM that makes them unique to only being able to do something in hockey. Because if that's the case, no hockey man should be able to walk out of hockey and get another job, because you can't have it one way where no one else can come in.
That's fair.
And right, they can't just leave hockey and go, oh, they'd be great at doing this.
Well, although
it works both ways, or it doesn't work.
There have been switch sports.
Ralph Kruger. He went to the EPL to be. I'm not sure he was team president or something like that.
And Paul DePodesta from the Mets went to the Browns, right? So that does happen occasionally. I just think, and I'm going to bring it back to Kevin. Kevin, I think what happened here with Leopold has been mainly good for Don Waddell, because I think he's going to get a raise out of it one way or the other.
Yeah. And I don't know if everybody remembers this, but Don Waddell was the runner-up for the expansion Nashville Predators. And so Leopold met him first, 23 years ago or whenever it was, and, liked him then as well. So, yeah, I thought Peter's assessment of that was actually quite fair, and including Don's record. He didn't excel in terms of making the Atlanta Thrashers a better team. What he did excel in, and if you talk to Gary Bettman, as I have about this, like, he kept that franchise afloat a lot longer than deserved to be. And it probably and Kevin, that thought in that statement probably explains a lot of why he wasn't offered a job in Winnipeg, because they didn't need him to keep it afloat in the city to begin with. It was gonna be buoyant for years. No,
right.
And what's interesting about him, though, is, and I think this is the point, and when there's a regime change, executives don't survive. And Waddell did. Not only did he survive, he survived with a guy who was difficult to deal with, and who's even said his plan was to fire Waddell when he got there. But he was so impressed with Waddell that he decided to keep him. But I do agree with what Russ did say, that what's going to come out of this one way or the other is, Don Waddell's going to be fine. He's either going to be president or GM of the Carolina Hurricanes for probably a little better salary than he would have gotten, or he's going to have a 3 or 4 year deal with the Minnesota Wild. And I think he'll do a good job. I'm even though I think what Peter said is fair about Don Waddell, I actually think, now that he's with a better team and a better organization, and he's got assets to work with, I think he's, he knows enough about the game. I think he can take the Hurricanes to the next level. Now we've got to see that. But one final point on this, and it's a point that I talked about once with Tom Dundon, and his point is, I can always get somebody to fill that role for what I'm willing to pay him. Like if you give Mike Agello right now $100,000 a year, he'll gladly take the job as general manager for the Carolina Hurricanes. So that's true. But the argument, of course, is, and that's the one that Mike was making, is that there are, talent issues here in terms of an ability to handle it. And, like I think in particular, these two teams we're talking about, you can't bring in a first-time GM. You can't bring in a first-time GM and try to take the Carolina Hurricanes to the next step because he doesn't understand what it takes to do that. He hasn't been a GM before. Yeah. And you can't bring a first-year general manager in my opinion, to try to solve the problems of the Minnesota Wild. So in both cases, I think, Don Waddell's qualifications are important. He's now been with two different organizations. He also worked with the Red Wings, and that's forgotten when they were champions.
Yeah, that's true.
So he has some knowledge of how that all works.
Yeah,
Kevin, I think you raised a really good point about that with the value of experience and knowing what to do. So if you're the Hurricanes, you need someone who's understood what steps, what needs to be in place, not just what you see on the ice, but in all other capacities of the organization that clubs that have had that next level of success have done. You need someone in there, and you need someone who can sell your owner on it as well. So if you're the person hiring a Tom Dundon, you need to also recognize too that you have to be sold on what your hire is going to do. I see Minnesota a little differently than you, though. I think given what they went through, the clearing, the loss of, the firing of Fenton, and then what happened before that with clearing of analytics department and other people, that's probably the place where you really are having a hard reset. And you've got a great coach from Bruce Boudreau. That's where you could probably bring in a fresh face because you can rely on Bruce Boudreau's experience. You can ride him out for a couple seasons and work with him and be open to other ideas that maybe Craig Leopold wants, because it is kind of a bit of a blank slate that way, like other than the coach. And as a new GM, you might not need to actually fire the coach right away because you're not someone anyone's expecting to do anything yet. You're still learning your chops, which might make it a palatable place for Bruce Boudreau to be.
All I can say is if Mr. Dundon wants to hire me for $100,000, I'll take the job, and then I'll quit, and then I can put on the banner here, former NHL GM Michael Agello.
Well, let me tell you that Peter's not going to be hired as a GM because they are not looking at a hard reset. I can tell you that without a doubt. They're looking for someone who can come in and make adjustments. The way they view that is they've got talent there and they've never been able to bring it all together. So
yeah,
I don't think Craig's going to hire you, Peter.
No, I'm not looking for that job. I don't want that. I want to hang on to my remaining hair and keep what little that isn't white. White.
See, I'm ready to be a GM. I've lost it all. Okay, couple things. Russ, there is a 3 p.m. Event in I think on Long Island regarding the Islanders in the building for the Belmont site. I don't know a lot of details here, but they keep the reports are that if things get to go forward, that the groundbreaking will be around Labor Day. How many times are they going to keep moving this ball forward regarding this situation?
Well, I spoke to our friend Ted Starkey about it yesterday, who works at Newsday, and so here's where we are. We have to stop pretending that it hasn't been delayed from what the original thought was, because I know Islander apologists on Twitter will do that and other people will do that. But at this point, it was supposed to happen months ago and it didn't.
Right.
So now after Labor Day is really like getting to be around the point when camp opens. However, the issue here is it could still be further delayed. There are potential problems there with Floral Park and I think their city council. So it's not a guarantee that is going to happen after Labor Day. And so right now, this whole project is behind schedule. It is. And at some point, when we talked about that other thing that has happened with the contract where they could stay at Barclays for another season, because if it gets delayed like 6 months or, a year, they're covered. I think that's going to come into play because right now we all have to admit, and everybody out in Twitter land has to admit, this has taken longer than they all thought, and this is what happens with Long Island politics.
Yeah, Kevin, right now, I mean, the Arizona situation has cooled a little bit with the changeover to the new owner, who's a billionaire, and it seems like at least it's going to get a few years to see if they can work out a building somewhere. It's not on the front burner about them moving someplace. With the Islanders here, if they don't get this building built, again, I think they're put on the front burner because I don't see the team moving out of the New York area. But at a certain point, if this situation is untenable, are they going to play at the Nassau Coliseum for the foreseeable future? Because they clearly don't want them to be at Barclays.
No, they don't, and they also don't want the Islanders to move. I mean, they want to keep them in the Metro. I mean, I'm sympathetic to with the Islanders and the Coyotes to trying to get new arenas in this day and age. It's just so difficult. Like the pendulum has completely swung the other way. Like at the longest time, it was just there were studies that says, well, there's so many dollars that gets put in the community by people coming to games and everything. And now we just don't believe that at all. It's taxpayer money. We're wasting it. Owners should pay for arenas themselves, blah, blah, blah. And it just makes it much more difficult. And you're just running against the wind all the time. Like I just don't know whether Arizona's ever going to get a arena built. And if they can't get an arena, it's certainly not working in Glendale. Then, I don't. I mean, I have been bullish on the Coyotes staying there forever, and I still, have hope that it can happen. But I'm starting to see cracks in it. I'm starting to wonder whether they'll ever get a new arena. And
you could move the Coyotes to Houston,
so,
and then you could move the Flames to Glendale because there's fans who have places in Greater Phoenix than there are Coyotes fans, and I'm dead serious.
Yeah, there may be.
Unbelievable how many Albertans are down there.
Yeah,
and I mean the Flames are a team that are going through the arena motions again now.
Yeah.
Right. Like, here's the thing about buildings. If there was money to be made in them, every billionaire would be building them.
Right.
That's all. Period. Dot. The end. Well, there isn't. There's no money in them.
I'll tell you what.
That's why they don't build them.
Yeah, Kevin, I think I know when the pendulum swung. When the Miami Marlins built theirs, and because they were like, well, look, the reason we don't get fans is because it rains all the time. We'll have a dome. Okay. They gave them a dome. They gave them a big place with taxpayer money, and nobody shows up.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, the situations around, like in Buffalo, the KeyBank Center, which has been renamed and named 5,000 different times, it's a little over 20 years old. The life of these buildings, remember, something built 20, 25 years ago didn't have as many luxury boxes, didn't have all the amenities that they want in newer stadiums. They, having the ability to have concerts there is limited by, whether they can get trucks to move in or the sizes of the stage and things of that nature. There's been whispers around the Buffalo area that they're going to look to build a new building. And obviously they want to build a new football stadium in the next few years, because I think Ralph Wilson Stadium is one of the oldest ones in the NFL, next to Lambeau and the revamped Chicago Soldier Field. And in Toronto, the Air Canada Centre / Scotiabank Arena is 20 years old. There hasn't been any talk about that because it's, right in the perfect place downtown, right near rapid transit and trains and everything. But eventually, within the next 5 to 10 years, there probably will be talk about that. And their baseball stadium, Rogers Center, 25 years ago, it was cutting edge as the Sky Dome. Now it's a concrete convertible. Now it's a joke. And
Mike, I will tell you this. Because Cuomo is still behind the Belmont project.
Right.
The Sabres won't even be able to talk about this project until that one gets settled, because it's the same state. Even though it seems like it's a billion miles away,
yeah,
he's not going to sign on with the Sabres before he figures out the Islanders, right?
The Pagulas would have to fund most of it, and they would probably depend on the state for infrastructure. So that I think that's what that's what's been supposedly been the case for a football stadium. They would probably have to foot the bill, which if that happens, then you're going to have seat licenses and things of that nature, and that's a road that they don't want to go down because Buffalo is not exactly financially able to handle that. So that might be a situation which would not work. Let's transition to this, Kev. We're now August 8th. We're now about 5 weeks from the beginning of training camp, and we've got Marner, Tkachuk, Besser, Laine, Connor, Braden Point, all these RFAs, all the ones that we looked at going forward at the beginning of the summer saying, okay, when are they going to start signing and how much are they going to get? And it's a staring contest between all these teams and all these free agents. And the question is, when are things going to start to break?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously they're all going to get signed. But I think we will see guys go into the season here because I think there are teams that are trying to hold the line a little bit, at least not to give away all of the farm. They'll only give a small plot of land to these teams. So they just don't want to give it all to them. And because of that, I think the majority will get signed before the season, but I wouldn't be shocked if there are one or two that, stretch out in there. But obviously, eventually they're all going to get signed because I think hopefully this summer we finally have put to bed the idea of, the reason we don't do offer sheets is they simply don't work. Mm-hmm. So these guys really don't have any leverage, other than withholding services. So,
Peter, I don't want to hear about offer sheets ever again because other than the joke that was the birth of an offer sheet to Sebastian Aho, which it took Dundon about 5 seconds to match. Really, nobody. We've heard the rumor about Columbus being interested in offering Mitch Marner an offer sheet, but it was only to the max 7-year deal, and Marner's camp didn't want that. So I think offer sheets on both sides will only be if it perfectly matches, the term and the amount and the criteria that, that the agent or that the team wants. And if there's any disagreement, it's not going to happen.
You know what? Millennials ruined offer sheets. That's all I can say. They don't work. The format of the offer sheet does not allow it to be a successful tool. It's a tool, but it does not work with a league now shifting to maximizing value on ELCs. Players coming out of wherever they're playing, whether it be Europe, whether it be the WHL, like the Canadian Hockey League or college, almost ready in your top picks to play a meaningful role on teams now. Mm-hmm. Why do you want to give up those assets for a guy you're going to have to not only overpay with assets, but then pay a lot of money to? It doesn't make sense in the current NHL model. It's a fun thing to have as a tool, but it's a tool that doesn't make any sense to use. It's like trying to use a chainsaw to do fine woodwork in the dining room. It doesn't make sense. I wish it did. I wish offer sheets were in a format that allowed them to be an effective tool that teams could use as leverage against someone else. But, we can't even get GMs to figure out how to weaponize their cap space right. Like hoping offer sheets become something of a tool is wishful thinking now. It's gone the way of the dodo. You're right, Mike. We should just stop talking about them.
I'm waiting for the first GM to sort of go public, and this will probably never happen, and say, hey, you know what? This is great that we're still negotiating, but negotiations end when camp starts because I've got to focus on this season. I've got to put a team out there. I don't want to do what the Leafs did last year. It disrupted their whole team. We're not doing that. So be prepared that, come September 10th, the 15th, that's it. Once camp starts, I'll talk to you over the weekends, but I'm not doing it day to day anymore.
Well, Kevin, let me just ask this because I mentioned this a couple days ago as a potential, and it's obviously such a solution that would be fraught with peril. But one of the things that's coming up here is now these are not arbitration eligible RFAs. It's offer sheet is the only means of leverage for them. I'm assuming that this in some way is going to get addressed in the new CBA. At least the owners will want to try that. I mean, would extending arbitration to after entry level be a solution? Because at least it would get these players back in camp or back playing.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly will be talked about, but you know, I don't think it's a hill that they're going to die on. You know, to using the Bill Daley phrasing. I just, you know, I think it's so few players, and it's top players, but you know, when you compare it to the number of players that they're dealing with, you know, this doesn't affect all that many players.
Right.
So that's why I don't think you go to the mat over it. You know, so we'll see. We'll see how it all kind of, you know, so much is going to depend on what the ask is of the players, like what they're trying to accomplish. Do they try to change the offer sheet? So I'm not sure they will either. I don't think that's affects enough players. I think they'd rather have the escrow altered, entry level salary, you know, things that affect a lot of players.
I agree. I think with the way contracts are being squeezed in terms of top end players getting the percentage of money and then stuff, there's going to be some cries in that membership to say we got to find an equalization way so that the rest of us aren't signing these weird 1 year $850,000 deals just to keep playing.
Right.
Like should although Kevin Shattenkirk is not hurting for money, is he worth 1.75 million? Like, you know what I mean? Like, shouldn't he be making a little bit more than that? Like, I'm not crying for his wealth or anything, but just in an open market.
Well,
I mean, there's variables of why it happened that way, but there is a squeeze, and so I think you're bang on, Kevin. I think there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff with escrow, a whole bunch of stuff about how to deal with that, and if an agent or whoever, a group of people can come up and show the players how you can weaponize offer sheets to your financial advantage, then they probably take a look at it, but not if it's only going to be the current format and only for the top end players. It needs to be able to be used in a way that allows players to benefit if they choose to take the risk of moving teams.
If there's like 5 or 6 teams that open camp and they're missing some of their best young players, this is going to lead towards the lockout. The owners are going to get fed up with this, and there's going to be action taken on the back end of this. There will. And so that's why you hope something gets done soon, because it should never even get to this point. It really shouldn't.
Well, the other issue here is that, you know, anything you do to help the top end players, and if we just to say there's always at least one on every team, and really, it's, if you look around, there's usually 3 guys that are making a lot of money on every team now. So, you know, we help those 90 guys. Well, if we help them, everybody getting $2 million, that means there might be 5 or 6 players in the middle of that roster that are going to be impacted by that, because they're not going to get as much. And they're you know, suddenly the guys that we're fighting for to get 2.5 million are down at 1.7. or 1.6 or 1.5 or 1 million. And, you know, like I looked at Rocco Grimaldi's, you know, arbitration, and, you know, he's fighting over a 1 year contract and, you know, $400,000 or $500,000. Well, if, you know, Stars are going to get more players, you know, what's he going to be fighting over then? You know, it's going to be down to, you know, it's just the minimum or we'll see you know, so, you know.
Okay, a couple quick questions in the chat, and now we can, with our new system that we're using here, we can see the questions if I put them on the screen. And our friend Funky Cold Zadina, who always asks a bunch of questions, and it's maybe unfair to Kevin because, you know, we're a month out from camp, and Yzerman is the new GM there, so the philosophy is going to be a little different from what Kenny Holland had done in the past. But he asked Kevin, do you think that any of Zadina, Veleno, Moritz Seider, or Chalowski have a chance of making the Red Wings this season?
I'll go Zadina, yes. Veleno starting in Grand Rapids, but will be on the team. Sader's a real wild card. Like I just have this feeling they want him to make it. There's just something about him. They like him. I know Yzerman is patient, so that would suggest he's going to go back to Germany or wherever. But I think they really would like to get him up as quick as possible. So I don't know. He's a wild card for me. Cholowski, like he played well early last year, and then he kind of hit a wall. And I think there's a little concern that he needs some games to sort of learn how to handle the 82 game grind and the physical aspect of it. And he's got to get better defensively. Mm-hmm. He can certainly handle the puck. So this is a guess on him, but I'm going to go no on him. So I'm going to go yes on Zadino, Velino eventually during the season. Seider, I think they want him to make it. And I'll say Cholowski will spend the year in Grand Rapids.
So one thing I could add, Kev, is I think Seider makes it because his original role in Germany was like a shutdown defender. And then as his offense got better, they put him in that role. But since Roenick's probably going to be your guy on the second power play there, they could still put Seider in there, not as a shutdown, but just as a defensive defenseman to start out.
Yeah, and a lot depends on Mike Green's health.
Right.
It really does. I just think, a lot of Detroit fans didn't like that signing last year because they really wanted just to go right with the rebuild. But he was important to have around. Like you look at their record with him and without him, and then you realize kind of how he holds the team together. And I think it's important for these younger defensemen to see a guy that, knows how to get the puck out of his zone, knows how to carry the puck into the zone, can run a power play. So I know they are really hoping that he's going to be ready to play.
Peter Yzerman's skills as a general manager are going to really be put to the test with the Red Wings, because I did a review of the Red Wings and looked at their roster, and you've got 3 or 4 forwards, guys like Darren Helm, Abdul Kader, Luke Glendening, all on long-term deals, all sort of like, their offensive numbers have trailed off. Now I know you need players to play on the team, but they really need these guys to either get back to where they were or be able to find a way to move them out. And on defense, they have 3 defensemen over the age of 33 in the final year of their contract in Eriksson, Daly, and Green. And if they're all healthy at the deadline, I see rental deals, because I think Detroit is going for sort of rebuild city. And that's where I think Yzerman's big challenge here is to get that team rebuilt as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I mean, we're just in the infancy of this, right? So we're going to have to take our time and watch how he sort of sees his season unfold, what options come his way, and how patient he wants to be. And it'll be really fascinating to sort of see what his vision for this team is, because there is a team doing a hard reset, right? Like, except you're bringing in an experienced person who is sort of, I guess can you call Yzerman the architect of what Tampa Bay is now? I think you can. I think
for sure.
I think that's a fair thing. So, he just happens to be a former NHL player who seems to have found success in a good way in the front office. And now they're bringing him back to sort of his career town. It'll be really fascinating to see if he, as a GM in Detroit, is the same kind of methodical person he was in Tampa, and if he's the same kind of style that the fans remember him as on the ice. Like, it'll be fun to watch. I think it's a long-term story, but it'll be super interesting for someone such as yourself, Kevin, who knows the franchise well and its history, to sort of watch how Yzerman comes in and does all this.
Well, what's amazing about him is his honeymoon is going to be so long. It might be the longest honeymoon a GM has ever had. Like, he could trade Dylan Larkin for a bag of peanuts, and the fans in Detroit would say, he must know what he's doing. Like, everybody just believes in if that German defenseman had been picked by Kenny Holland, there would have been insurrection,
right?
Without a doubt. But because it's Yzerman, and by the way, Ken Holland knew that, and that played a role in his thinking. Is he didn't want the franchise to go down, and he knew how much the fans had turned on him. And he thought it was going to have an impact on, everything, including season tickets. And I think that's one of the reasons that it helped him conclude that it was time to hand the reins over to Yzerman, because he knew Yzerman would get a honeymoon period that will be lengthy. But the fans adore Yzerman for good reason, obviously. He was the ultimate captain.
Quickly on this one, and we'll then end the show. Our buddy Flamester, Randy Workman, asks, Mike, would the panel consider trading Mitch Marner? Let me answer first, since the Leafs are my beat. Not a chance in hell. I think that they want to sign him. They have made the room to sign him. They made that Clarkson deal to open up the cap space on LTIR. I think right now it's a haggling over term. And not as much amount, but it's term. He wants to get it as close to getting a short-term deal and hopping to UFA as quickly as possible to hit the big money. And that's what Darren Ferris is looking for. And anything over 6 or 7 years, they're asking for as much as Matthews is getting. And I don't think the Leafs are going down that road. So I think it's going to end up being a 3-year deal. And I don't think that they'll even entertain an idea of trading him. Kevin, do you think they would be open to trading him?
Not a chance. They won't even listen to offers on him.
Russ?
No, I don't think they would trade him, and I wouldn't. But let's just say the season's ready to start and Mitch Marner isn't there. If I were Mike Babcock, I would be like, everybody look around. Look at the guy to the right of you. Look at the guy to the left of you, because when we do sign Mitch Marner, one of you will probably be without a job real soon. Right.
Probably the guy wearing number 88. Peter, Marner, do you think they would entertain trading him, or would you?
No. They're keeping him. This will not be Nylander 2.0. This will get done.
I agree. Okay, great show, guys. We will be back tomorrow with another edition of the Hockey Buzzcast. Thank you to Kevin Allen. Thank you to Peter Tessier and Russ Cohen. I'm Michael Agello. Thanks for watching, and remember, without the buzz, it's just hockey.